just questioning, can something be retrospective? Last week, our state government had a great problem in their legislation about the incarceration of children in adult correctional facilities. I think that was a mistake, and I would ask what's the name of it? Tania, whether we could retrospectively say we get the voice. Can we do something about something that feels absolutely unjust and wrong, that we can turn it back to something that's just?
That's just wrong. I mean, you've got to question first, why are these children in the system? That's where we've got to look at. We've got to track at why are they in the system. And I have this conversation a lot with my the soccer mums, because my son plays soccer, and they're like, well, all the crime rates, all these Aboriginal kids are stealing cars in Townsville and Cairns. And I said, well, correct, but without the voice, what's the solution? If you're not hearing what we have to say, what's the solution? You know, and so in addressing your question, I personally feel if we are part of the solution, because I'm an expert in my own life as an Indigenous person, no one can tell me what it's like to be black in this country. And in the sense that we've got to look at why are they in the system first? We've got to look at the deep issues and the cause of the deep issues. We try to address that when I worked with Noel under welfare reform, when we looked at the welfare system and how that's on the ground in the community and how that's playing out. And now, 10 years ago, I called these children the lost youth because they were getting caught up in child safety, and then they were the ones running rampage out stealing cars. And so I said to this mum, well, that's really great that you jump on this notice board and you call like another black child doing this, but we got to question what is the solution, because right now nothing works. And until you can come to us, because I said, until we have a voice in the decisions that impact the lives of these children from day to day, nothing changes. The status quo stays the same. That is why we have to have a representation, and you need to hear the voices of those that are affected on the ground. Those kids who are incarcerated, if you did a baseline data assessment on them to see whether they could read and write, they'd be 16, 17, reading and writing year 3. So these children are, and then they become adults, underskilled adults caught up in the welfare system, and then we get blamed. And I track these children with both state and federal policy system and how it works on the ground. There are red tape everywhere. We are so politicised in this country and in these communities that we can't scratch our bums.
Look, in 2016, Cape York Institute put a submission into the inquiry into the Queensland Human Rights Act when it was first being contemplated, and we suspected that on its own, the legislated Human Rights Act would not make enough difference to protect Indigenous rights in Queensland, and we advocated for a constitutionally guaranteed voice to enable Indigenous people to have a say when government makes these kinds of decisions. So it is exactly the kind of thing that a voice will be able to give advice on and hopefully help inform better policy making and decisions in the future.
Into the debate, Jim injected the issue of economics, and in particular the idea that this may save money in budgetary terms by being more efficient. I wonder if it could be seen, at the risk of being overly optimistic, of being an opportunity for boosting productivity amongst Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people by enabling a more practical and effective solutions to be found. By way of example, in remote areas of Queensland for many years, mining companies just paid royalties, but then with increasing input from Aboriginal and Islander leaders, they started to include provisions in Indigenous land use agreements for employment, and in particular apprenticeships and traineeships that produce lasting benefits. So is one of the arguments in favour of it a potential boost to productivity?
It might be, but I don't think that's the kind of the primary reason. Yeah, what I'm trying to say, and maybe not as eloquently as the others, is there are a whole bunch of reasons to vote yes. And, you know, it may be that economic efficiency is one of those, and maybe that's one of the arguments that a section of the Australian community will respond to. But really, before we get to any of that, you know, I just believe that we will get better outcomes for people in some of the areas that Tania and Shireen and others have spoken about already, if we start from a foundation of listening. And there will be all kinds of benefits, but the one that I'm most focused on, and again, here as a member of a government rather than necessarily the treasurer in that government, is I think we have to do things differently. Tania said this in a different way a moment ago. We can't keep going on with exactly the same approach and expect better outcomes. The Voice gives us this opportunity, generational opportunity to do things differently by beginning from a foundation of listening. And all of those benefits I think are there, certainly in the way we think about employment in communities, all of those sorts of things. Obviously, those are big upsides, but I think before we get to that, there's something a little bit more foundational.
I think long term, I mean, say we get across, we have a lot of work to do. We've got to fix children who are dying of rheumatic heart disease. We've got to make the generation healthy. And I think 20 years from now, possibly, we'll be more engaged in the economy in this country. We'll be more engaged as teachers, as doctors, but we need a fair go.
I understand the voice is just a voice, has no power, but because it's in the Constitution, the government has to listen to them. And say the voice comes up with a law they want passed into government that in some way helps the Indigenous people or benefits them in some way, and the government of the day says, no, we're not doing it. Is it possible for them to go to the High Court and get a ruling that forces the government to do it?
I want to be very, very clear. Nothing forces the government to listen, right? The constitutional amendment that I put up on the screen says that there shall be a body. So the only guarantee in constitutional terms, in legal terms, is that the Parliament has to legislate to create a body, right? It means there will always be a voice. It'll be up to Parliament how the voice looks and how it operates, how it's chosen, and that can change over time as the legislation changes over time. But it's very important to understand the voice is purely advisory, right? So nothing can force anybody to follow the advice, okay? And the effectiveness and persuasiveness of this advisory body will be up to its members and the representatives. They will have to give smart, persuasive advice and sensible advice in order to persuade politicians and bureaucrats to follow the advice. But it's up to government and Parliament whether or not they follow the advice.
Hi, so I'm a student, so obviously I can't vote, and my school's very conservative, so I can't do anything in that aspect. But is there any, actions you think the youth can take to kind of promote this view?
Sign up to volunteer, darling. Yeah, sign up to volunteer, share some amazing TikTok. There's some amazing content out there. Just keep sharing and diffusing the misinformation with information.
There's no longer walking up Uluru. I think you can't walk up Mount Porning anymore. There's talks about other restrictions on other mountains. There's up at Gari, they suddenly sort of stopped camping on 3 campsites without even the courtesy of telling people that had booked those campsites. So my question is, how do you argue against that?
First of all, each of those things that you just listed are decisions taken by government. And there will always be in government decisions people who are supportive and people who are not so supportive across all areas of government policy, including those ones. Those decisions, and there may be people who don't like those decisions were taken by governments in the absence of a voice, and so it's hard to blame the voice for those kinds of outcomes. More importantly, I think more broadly, I get it all the time. GP would get it all the time in this community. I get it down the road. People say to me all of the time, don't First Nations people already have enough? And to the people I know and trust enough to be brutally frank with, I say, are you kidding me? Are you kidding? Like, we have this great gift of being in a country where most of us have been here for 5 minutes, but the first of us have been here for 65,000 years caring for this place, the most beautiful country on earth. 65,000 years, the oldest continuous living culture in the history of humankind is the one that we have an opportunity to work with. And so if you start from that basis, and not everybody will, I understand, there are difficult conversations here. They're not just easy conversations. We're not going to win this if Graham and I sit down and have a coffee and decide that we agree with each other 100%. We're going to win this if we have these difficult conversations with people who don't agree. That's why I salute a friend over here who's, got some obstacles. It's not a big part of your school conversation. You're younger than the rest of us. There's a whole bunch of obstacles, but you're here anyway, and we really respect that. We think that's amazing. And it's your country as much as anyone's, and so the fact that you want to have a say in making it better lifts the rest of us up as well. But when you're having these difficult conversations, it boils down to this, and Terry's question boils down to this. This outcome that we seek will not cost anybody anything. We have absolutely nothing to lose from yes, but we have so much to gain from yes. We have so much to gain. And even if you take the most minimalist view of this, then the most minimalist view of this is to say, when you're thinking about heart disease that Tania mentioned and our friend up the back, you think about incarceration. We can't, in some of these areas, we can't really do worse. We can only do better. And so the voice is about doing things differently. It's about doing things better. It's about constitutional recognition so that we can listen better. And if we do it right and we get the outcome that we seek, then we give ourselves a better chance at tackling some of these big issues, which shouldn't exist in a first-rate, first-world country like ours.
Specifically, what can the voice do that the NIAA can't?
There are programs, there are agencies, there are efforts, there are resources going into trying to tackle some of these sorts of issues. The difference here is, first of all, constitutional recognition. That can only really happen one way, and that's by changing the constitution. That's why we're having a referendum. And we want to build these institutions on this constitutional recognition. As Shireen has told us today and on other occasions as well, the way we design these institutions is up to the Parliament. But the basis, the constitutional basis of these institutions begins in our Constitution in the best form. And so all this is a simple change to the Constitution upon which we build these institutions, and we think about these kinds of resourcing decisions. The agency, some of these other bodies that have set up are not necessarily to be replaced by the voice. But we think the voice gives us a better chance than all of the institutional arrangements that we've had to hear.
The National Indigenous Australian Agency, I want to be very clear, is simply the Indigenous Affairs Department, right? It's a department of government. So it's the same old, under ministers, there are departments that administer policy. Bureaucrats, full of bureaucrats who make and administer policies, right? The National Indigenous Australians Agency is a rebranded Indigenous Affairs Department. It's just been given a new name. Okay, so it's got a mission statement, and this is, you observed correctly, it's got a mission statement that says all the right things about listening, partnership, dialogue, And it's true that governments of both sides, left and right, for many years now have been saying in their rhetoric, they've been saying all the right things in terms of we need to work with Indigenous communities, we need dialogue, etc. The problem is, as the Productivity Commission confirmed a couple of weeks ago, it doesn't happen in practice more often than not. Why? Because of the structures. The top-down power dynamic is very ingrained, and it goes right back to the Constitution. Because at the end of the day, the 97% elephant that is the all-powerful government doesn't do a very good job of listening to the 3% mouse of Indigenous communities, especially remote and regional Indigenous communities. It's just not the way the structures are set up, right? That is what the Productivity Commission said. It said the bureaucracy doesn't really get the scale of structural change that is needed to create real change, to deliver better results. So even though they have a nice mission statement, in reality, the listening and partnership doesn't happen enough.
Can I just give you an example of how accountability and transparency might work for Indigenous people and having our voice and what the voice actually mean? I had about 250 case study women looking at the NIA system and the unemployment program. We found out a woman finished grade 10, she was reading and writing at year 6. The unemployment program paid $25,000 per participant to get them skilled to get into industry. We got down to it. We found out that about $35 million over 5 years for the 2 subdivision area of Cape York that I work in was paid by NIA to a job provider, but these people had no skills. The owner of the job provider bought his 5th Ferrari, and he probably worked for PwC.
How's the yes vote going to support self-determination for First Nations people?
We're exercising self-determination. We just need accountability. We just need, as a taxpayer, as a mother, we need accountabilities for the so-called goodwill and the billions of dollars, because realistically, we like to beat up marginalised people in this country. Oh, look at them, this is where we're going. The gap's gotten bigger. The rich use the best accountants in this country to dodge the bullet. Look how much of millions of dollars they're actually using with the anti-no campaign. We're operating on goodwill. Where money we blackfellas got. So, for self-determination, by giving us a voice, you've given us self-determination.
Some of your words are telling us that this constitutional change is so important, and yet at the other side of your mouths you're saying it's completely benign, can't invoke High Court and stuff like that. So my question is, in reference to the NDIS, which is an amazing, broad, bold program which helps a sector of our society who really need help, and for all its flaws, I think it's doing a good job. That was introduced without constitutional change. Why doesn't the government just get on with this and create the voice if they were able to do it for the NDIS?
This is modest yet profound. It's not about talking out of both sides of our mouths. It's the fact that this is truly a middle ground proposal. And I think it is instructive that no proponents on the far left say, oh, this is not enough. It's only advisory, this is not enough. But way further to the right, what are they saying? Oh, this is too radical. This is scary. This is going to destroy democracy. So what does that tell you? It tells you it's modest yet profound. It's not scary. It's an advisory body. It can make a real difference. It can deliver practical outcomes. It's not going to change everything overnight, but it can make a difference. It's not nothing. A merely symbolic mention in a preamble, that's nothing. That will not deliver practical outcomes. So it's not about talking out of both sides of the mouth. It's about being honest and saying this is modest yet profound. It's sensible, pragmatic, middle ground proposal. In terms of why does it need to be in the Constitution? Well, firstly, this is about constitutional recognition. This is about recognising, finally, Indigenous people in the founding document of our country, from which they were explicitly excluded in 1901. But secondly, it's about permanence. There have been Indigenous advisory bodies in the past, but as I explained, they've been chucked out. It hasn't been underpinned by a constitutional promise. If we vote yes to this, we will be making a national promise that Indigenous people will always have a voice in their affairs. And that's what makes this profound. That's what makes this the potential to be a permanent game changer in this country.
I hear Graham saying it's better value for the taxpayer. And then I hear Chalmers saying that, where did I write that? It will bring about better outcomes. And then Shireen says that it only gives advice, yet the statement on the screen says they're allowed to make representations. In my view, making representations is completely different to giving advice. So it leaves me wondering, And I guess I just don't feel comfortable wondering.
In 2014, when Indigenous leaders worked with constitutional conservatives to devise this concept of a constitutionally guaranteed Indigenous advisory body, the original drafting actually used the word advice, right? Then over 9 years of scrutiny and debate and the best experts in the country looking and improving and giving various iterations, the word advice was changed to representations. Why? To make doubly, triply sure that there could be no argument that advice by convention should be followed, like advice from ministers to the Governor-General by convention should be followed. So the experts and conservative experts in their wisdom changed advice to representations to make this even more modest, to make sure that this respects the supremacy of Parliament and government, to make sure that this would be constitutionally and legally safe. So that's why it was changed from advice to representations.
My question is, what do we say to people who say, vote no because this isn't going far enough? Because I think you gave 3 really compelling, positive and really understandable presentations about how important this is and why we should vote yes. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on how we convince those people to vote yes.
This can be at the same time modest and profound, to understand that it costs us nothing, but we've got a lot to gain. But I think as well as that, this proposal has been designed to succeed. You know, we're not interested in an honourable defeat. We're not interested in a small sliver of the population feeling very good and marching off to defeat. We're interested in victory and in changing the Constitution and in changing the way that we give a voice to First Nations people. And so in order to do that, and in our line of work this is familiar, you're trying to build the broadest constituency that you can. And I hope you'll forgive a sort of a partisan reference here, but try and cast your mind back before the Liberals and the Nationals said that they were for no. And I know this because I saw it sitting next to him and being in these discussions. The Prime Minister's aspiration, his objective was to try and get the Parliament, all sides of the Parliament, to agree to it. And we kind of forget that because, you know, that's not been where it's landed in some of the other parties. I'm trying not to be too partisan about it, but you know what I mean. And so we're trying to design something that can attract majority support. Not just the people who are already convinced, but the people like the people Terry's been hanging out with and all of us have been hanging out with who are not yet convinced. And in order to do that, we've got to reassure people that we have nothing to lose, but we have everything to gain in all of the ways that Shireen ran through a moment ago.
Tania, when you stood up and spoke, it really impacted on me. It hit me in my heart. And for me, sharing with people, I want to know, my question is there a way I can get a clip or put it up on YouTube or something that I can show people who are undecided? Because the head stuff, explaining stuff's been great, but when it hits your heart and when you speak such truth, it's hard to deny it.
When I was Young Australian of the Year, the amount of people, I didn't know, I'm a little girl from the bush. I came to Clayfield College with thongs on. And I had no idea that the Korean kid next to me was from Korea. I thought she was related to Jackie Chan. And I sit here and cry, and it was not so long ago that I had a go at Peter Beattie after the 40th anniversary of the a right to vote and the unintended consequences in Parliament. I was 25, 26. I'm in my 40s and I've got 2 kids who are half white, but they're Australian. And I sit here and I cry for my country. My cousin is Kathy Freeman, my full-blood cousin. Every time I stand up here with yous, I think I'm winning that race with Kathy. And that's where we've got to come to as a nation. And I'm sooky and I'm a potty mouth. And by you showing up today just really goes to show that you are giving your time because you want change. You're fed up too.
I had the privilege of being involved in the Women's Constitutional Convention for the Republic that happened before the big one. And I had the absolute privilege to vote yes in that, knowing fair well that the question was set up, I guess by Howard for failure, because we couldn't decide on a Prime Minister, a President or whatever that question wasn't answered. Profoundly feel that, you know, I'm part of history and making history here. Really feeling the no arguments at the moment. So I think a takeaway from this, if the panel can give us just really 3 short things, even if it's a word, if it's a sentence, to put some positivity around the yes vote that we can walk out the door with, so we don't feel like we did all those decades ago with the Republic referendum, and walk out of here with a lot of positivity. Thanks.
We can totally win this. We've got around 6 weeks, and the passion that I can see in the audience and the light that I can see in all of your faces listening to Tania just now tells me that we've got the tenacity and the guts and the courage to go out there and persuade the Australians that need to be persuaded and unite this country for a yes vote. We just need to go out there and work harder than the no case, knock on more doors than the no case, have more conversations than the no case. And frankly, we've got a better argument than the no case. We do. We have got truth and fact on our side. So please help us dispel the myths, have as many conversations as you can, do whatever you can. And I think that if we do that, if we truly stand in solidarity with Indigenous people, because all they're asking for, very modestly, very pragmatically, is an advisory voice in their own affairs. I think Australians can vote yes to that. And I think with you doing the hard work over the next 6 weeks, we're going to see a successful result.
I just want to leave this on the floor tonight. I've had some of my own friends, Indigenous mobs, my own family, say, I'm voting no. And I said, well, don't bloody whinge then. That clearly is the reality of what we're facing.
But it's hard to top those 2 answers, and this is our last chance. So I think from Graham and I, really just to thank you. I'll hand over to Graham in a second. But to thank you for this opportunity to have this conversation, and not just about the things we agree on, but the things that we need to clarify, the things that we need to work on, the things that we need to be more convincing about. It is such an incredible honour to be up here with you two in particular. And really to see, as Shireen and Tania said, we watch the way that you react to their arguments. And it is something really properly wonderful to see that people are, prepared to have a crack here. You all understand that it's not easy. Lisa's question goes to, really the fundamental question, are we capable of something like this? And you all know, I think, or most of you know, I think probably all of you know, that our country is at its best when we kind of put our arms around each other and try and do something that we can be proud of. And this is something that we can be really proud of, but it is going to be really, really, really hard. And it's going to be ugly in parts, and people are going to say stuff that they know is not true. And there'll be all kinds of things on social media. And there will be opportunists and grandstanders and all of the usual types that come out at times like this. And we just have to be more committed and better. More dedicated, and as Shireen said, prepared to work harder. And as I said before, and the last thing I'll say now, is if we do think about that morning after, and think about whether or not we're better off putting everything into this attempt, because we don't know whether another attempt or another opportunity would come by, and maybe it won't, then I think that should be enough to really kind of fire us up. to try and get this outcome that we want to see, but much more importantly than that, better outcomes for the First Nations people of this country. Thank you.